welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely riveting edge of your seat book. It was one sitting read for me. It absolutely stole my life for the time that I was reading it, and I am so thankful for it. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, I'm Jacy Morris. My book is called We Like It Cherry, and it's an intense read that I hope people check out. So
It is an intense read, and I do hope people check it out too, and I'm going to try to get as many as I can to do so in my capacity as a librarian. Before we talk about the book itself, I'd love if you could talk about your career a little bit, your journey as a writer, perhaps your other books.
sure. Well, I mean, I don't know if you have the time to talk about all my other books. I believe We Like It Cherry will be my 31st book.
Wow.
So I started out self-published, and I think I've been writing for probably a decade. Probably didn't get serious about it until pandemic time, and I was just like had a lot of time there. I was working as a teacher. I've been a teacher for over 20 years, and so I had a little more time on my plate. Let me just look into the business of this, how to sell things, and through that, I started sort of coming up and getting my name out there, and then started actually submitting things to people, and then We Like It Cherry is probably the highest I've come in the literature world so far, but I'm looking to go even further. As far as writing goes, I used to be a movie reviewer a long time ago. I did that for years. I had my own website and did like thousands of reviews, and through that I met some filmmakers, and I started writing screenplays. And in the screenplay world, I didn't necessarily care for working with people and getting feedback from producers that just didn't make sense. Like they didn't understand story, they didn't understand craft, and they would just come out of left field with these suggestions that really turned me off of the film world. And so then I switched to novels. My most successful series is called This Rotten World. It's a zombie series. They're all self-published. It's up to 11 books now, but those have done really well. People love zombie stuff. And then, at some point I started being less about what people want and more about the art and what I want. And I started writing more indigenous horror because, that's what I am. And I was like, I never really saw it when I was younger. I feel like there's a space there. And so now I kind of do a little bit of both, a little bit of that sort of mainstream entertainment horror and then more literary, artful, thematic horror that happens to be indigenous.
Cool. Yeah, it's sort of like the to borrow from filmmaking, the one for me, one for them type rule. And I think that does help explain how you've been so incredibly prolific in a relatively short period of time. That's amazing. I have another question about like how your time reviewing movies and writing for the screen has influenced your approach to novels. To me, there's a very sort of cinematic sensibility to your writing, if only through like the vivid imagery and a very strong sense of place. Are there other ways that you think that your past writing experiences have shaped your approach to novels?
Yeah, I mean, my love of movies is probably more influential than my love of books on my writing. I definitely am aware of pacing. I'm not a huge fan of like books that spend a lot on details. I like to get short, sharp, punchy details that stand out and then keep the action moving. My goal as a writer is to make it like a film. I don't want you to be bored. I don't want you to turn it off. I don't want you to put it down. And so I really am cognizant of the pacing, and really just once the ride starts, I'm not really gonna let up on it.
Nice. So if we could talk a little bit about Ezra, who is also like a filmmaker of a sort. I'd love to know what went into crafting him as a character, especially I think with how you are dealing with the complexities of modern Indigenous identity through him as a character, especially in the wake of some things that you mentioned in the book, the boarding schools and campaigns to erase Indigenous cultures. What went into building Ezra?
So Ezra is probably the first queer main character I've ever written. I have an author friend that I talked to who's queer, and I was just like, I was reading his books, and I was like, man, that's really cool. I always felt conflicted about being an ally, but not actually having a lot of queer characters in my books, and I just didn't know how to write it authentically. I didn't know how to do it correctly, and because it's not my experience. But I feel like it's important, especially in the Indigenous space where there's just, it's not a ton of it representation. So I found it sort of necessary. So my author friend Carlos E. Rivera, who wrote this outstanding trilogy called the White Harbor Trilogy, really sort of opened my eyes on how to do it. And he helped me with some feedback on it. And when he read the first draft, he was like, cool, I love that relationship. I love everything. And then I was like, oh, thank you, because it's not my experience. And so that was hard, but I was into the challenge of it. It's like, I feel like this needs to be out there. When I had first thought up the story, it was just, the story came from a dream. And so it was just me and my wife in the story. I was like, I've done stories like that before. So I really want to switch it and get into this space and understand. And even though it's a horrific book, I wanted to make something beautiful within that horror. And that's where Ezra came from. And I understand, the conflicted nature of the character, of who he is versus what he can be, is sort of the driving force. And it's a painful reality that, sometimes we have to play these roles in society to get ahead. And the question is, of course, well, should we be doing that at all? And wouldn't we be better off if we stop playing those games? And that's kind of the driving force of Ezra. He just sort of formed organically. I'm not a big planner when it comes to characters. I just came up with the name, figured out the situation, and then I let him go. I let him become himself and find those conflicts and sort of wove those throughout the story. So, yeah.
Nice. I do think that there is a lot of beauty that he adds to the story. His relationship with Stu at the outset is really, it feels lived in and real. And I'm curious about this way that you say that. It sounds like you're saying that the plot sort of like helps you figure out who the characters are and how they respond to things. Does that at some point start to, once the plot shows you who they are, do they start to drive the plot a little bit as you get deeper into it, or?
Sure. I mean, when I write a book, the only thing I really have in mind is the beginning and the ending. And so I just sit down and the characters decide themselves, and then their personalities. I'm very keen. I want my characters to feel realistic. Like, they're not going to do things that don't line up with their personality and who they are in the rest of the book. They may make mistakes, but oftentimes it's not a personality flaw. It's just, this was really intense and I didn't make the right decision. Because that's the way life is, right? We are who we are pretty much all the time. We make our same errors, we make our same successes. And so I feel like that's an important part of the characters, and making them feel realistic. Even the supporting characters, like, I know you could say this character walks into this room and how do they react? And based upon what I've decided for the character, I know exactly how they're going to react. So they just sort of write themselves at that point. It's not me, trying to shoehorn the plot into the characters. The characters do sort of drive the plot once I know who they are. And I found out who Ezra and Stu were very quickly in the beginning of the story. Like, I learned them very fast. And so it was very easy to write those characters once that happened.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about the situation that Ezra and Stu and the rest of their crew find themselves in. Ezra works for a show called Indigenous Insider. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, sort of how you decided on his career and then building or sort of developing the Winnoquin, the people who have invited them to come and film. Yeah, talk a little bit about how that character that you built in Ezra and his dynamic with Stu, how does that then feed into the plot? I guess I feel like I've rambled a little bit with that question, but that made sense.
Yeah, so the career aspect was sort of driven by the fact that I had to get them to the Arctic. And I was like, well, for what possible reason would you go to the Arctic Circle if you're, a person like me or you or anyone, right? And so the documentary crew really sort of lended itself to that. And it sort of drove that personality part of Ezra where he's trying to get ahead. He's trying to become, something bigger, something better. He's got that drive in him. And so the documentary crew really lent it perfectly. As far as the tribe, it had always been an Arctic tribe in my mind. And so I did a lot of research into sort of Inuit culture and some of the more Arctic Circle cultures. And in the end, I decided I wanted to be pretty respectful about it. And so I made up the tribe because they do some things that, the Inuit don't do. So I didn't want to, be disrespectful to that tribe. And so then I sort of built out the culture. There are reflections of Inuit culture in there as far as you live in a desolate place and you have to do certain things to survive because there's not a lot of resources in the Arctic Circle. It's sea life. You get some plants in the summer and that's about it, right? So that's how that sort of went about. And did I answer your question?
You did, yeah. And I'd love to, yeah, I really love the Arctic setting and the Arctic as a setting for horror because even before you add in anything else, like you already sort of have a baseline of survival horror going on, So
Mhm.
the stakes are just so raised because survival is going to be so difficult, even if everything goes really well, which, not to spoil anything, not everything goes to plan here.
Yeah.
Um, Talking about, how you use the encounters between the filmmaking team and the Winnequen to sort of compare and like interrogate cultural constructs, shared values, mores, things like that. What I think is so interesting, right, is that as you might expect, when our film crew meets the new tribe, they are surprised by some of the things that they encounter there, some of the sort of the cultural values that they center on. But the film crew is just as weird to the Winnequen as the other way around, right? So can you talk about how you use that encounter sort of to maybe interrogate the values of the world? That's huge, but so
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have cultures interacting, there is some of that feeling out process. There's always that we don't do it this way, they do it this way. It's just trying to figure it out and sort of sandwich it into your own reality so that it fits and feels more comfortable because there's an anxiety there when you are not among your own culture and you're out of your element and you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this like this? There's a questioning, a thoughtfulness. It's one of the reasons why, I don't watch a lot of reality TV, but I've always watched travel shows because I just find it fascinating. And that another culture is a total mirror on your own culture. Like things that you take for granted, you don't even think about until those are not the way things are done in another place. And I find that disorienting and also anxiety producing, but also it's a great, tool for growth and understanding that this is not the way it has to be. These things that you have been brought up to be told that that's the way it is. That's not how it has to be. And so that I was very cognizant of including that in there. It wasn't just, oh, look at these people, they're so weird. It was, look at what they're doing and how does this reflect upon my life? And I think that's a driving force of the book as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you capture that, as you say, that sense of like vulnerability and anxiety, perhaps when you step outside your own constructs and the culture that has shaped your life. But I think it also shows that being too stuck inside your own worldview can be a danger as well, because you miss out on things that could help you to thrive or to survive the situation that you are in, as it were. That brings me to, I guess, like, I don't know if you would call it tone, but I really love how the book balances the horror, the grimness, the gore. There is like some really effective gore going on there too, with something that I think is also like very cathartic and ultimately hopeful. So speaking as broadly as you like without spoiling anything, how do you balance those two modes, as it were?
Yeah, I mean it is the juggling act of the writer, right? Like it's a weaving process, right? It's like I gotta have this scene. I'm gonna describe it as viscerally as possible to get that reaction, and then I'm gonna dial it back and make sense of it through the character's eye. and I'm going to bring in their humanity to that instead of just saying, here, look at this horrible thing. Ooh, isn't that horrible? We as people can go through a lot, and we can see horrible things in our own lives, and we can justify it and play it and make it fit in our reality. And I think that back and forth process is key to not only not burn out the reader with the horrible events that are happening, but to bring them closer to the character. And so it's something I've learned over the years as a writer. I've always sort of written horror and written gore very well. And making it feel real and realistic and not burning out the reader on it has always been sort of a challenge for me. But I feel like I finally found that. And it's really just that balance of, you got to bring it back to character once you do something horrible. You have to make this matter, or else, you're just a splatter book. And that's not necessarily what I'm trying to do with those.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because sort of that attention to character and trying to avoid, I guess, what you might call exploitation, like kind of mirrors like Ezra's crisis about his own show. He
Yeah.
wants to represent these indigenous cultures that he films, but he's also really worried that it's exploitative on behalf of the network and whatever their aims are and their financial incentives and what have you. So there's a little interesting, little mirroring there.
Yeah, there's all sorts of parallels when you start working with thematics. And yeah, it plays out big in this book, especially all the way through to the end. There's a social aspect to it, even during all these, horrific events that befall this crew.
Well, wow. I just loved this book so much, and I am so excited to recommend it to our readers. What is on the horizon for you? Are you writing right now, or are you mostly concentrating on promotion? Where does the writing life find you at the moment?
I'm always writing. Before this, I was like, I looked up and it was 10:47 because I was revising another book, and I was like, oh no, I gotta get things ready. But yeah, I have another novel coming out in November called One Shot. It's another indigenous horror. That one's coming out from Torrid Waters, which is an imprint of Crystal Lake Publishing. So I have that. I have an agent who's selling some stuff. In the meantime, I have piles of manuscripts I'm working on because I write really fast. I write a lot. I think I have 6 completed projects just sitting around, and we'll see where it goes from there. I've also been writing a lot of short stories. I'm always in a constant flux of creating, revising, editing, emailing. It's a lot. So yeah, more stuff on the horizon for me. I'm just waiting for some deals to come in, and want to see how We Like It Cherry does, and see where it goes from there.
Nice. Well, fingers crossed for you. I hope this book does incredibly. And yeah, I can't wait to read what's next. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah. Glad you enjoyed it.
Listeners, it's your turn now. Please check out We Like It Cherry. It is an absolute roller coaster of a read. And if you see me at the library, I am going to tell you about it. So get ready for that. All right. Thank you, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.